The language was the same. Most people who came to Virginia, most people who came to Massachusetts, were in fact indentured servants. They couldn't pay the passage. And so what they did is they signed themselves into servitude for 7 years. That's what the Africans were told themselves. And a few Africans after 7 years in that initial wave, in fact, were freed. But over time, and this is, of course, the curse that hits all of us interested in poverty and human rights in this country. Over time, sometimes unthinkingly, sometimes deliberately, blacks were shed right after right after right, until by the mid-17th century, they became slaves. Native American stories change as well. They got fed up with the whites in 1622. They had a massacre. But disease, plagues, syphilis did them in even greater than physical violence. By 1644, they were subjugated. By 1651, Jamestown had the first reservation in America. And this brings us close then to the fifth continuity, which is probably going to be as far as I get, that rivalries among groups competing for resources prompts social injustice and often results in poverty. The haves demand more, the have-nots get less. But ideas in poverty, and this is why historians get tenure and get to stay in the academy, ideas about poverty change over time, which I'm not going to be able to talk to you about very much at all. So let me leave you with one thought. You can take my course that meets on Monday at 4. Ideas about poverty are often colored by other ideas in this country, by racism, sexism, ethnic prejudice, and ageism. And they're also colored by the role that we think the public sector owes us. Sometimes public sectors are expansive, as they were in the Great Society. And sometimes they're harsh. And so there have been many, many changes in this country in attitudes about poverty, that was change 1, and measurements. Let me quickly go through it because I can't let it go. Images dichotomize. It's we against them. Of course, I'm part of the we group, although I find myself increasingly being part of the them group. Them is not as good as being we. And so while the Gulen Movement likes to push for inclusiveness, we don't always have it. What's we they interrupt to? I'm the in crowd. They're the other. I belong. I'm the frat boy. They're the stranger. I'm safe. I'm old. They're a threat. I'm afraid of them. And who are the thems? According to Elizabethan poor laws, it was anyone who wasn't really family. The local community took over, and then grudgingly, so did the private sector. But for much of our history, the line between poverty and near poverty was slim. You know, it wasn't really until the 20th century that this nation had a solid middle class. Economic recessions, famines, all sorts of things. Racial tension, sexual biases caused incredible variations. And it really mattered where you lived. Moral judgments come in here. My moral judgments. You're deserving. You're a widow. You're old. You're unworthy. You're a drunk. Or to follow Professor Kleinberg, you're Irish. You're Polish. Or play the race card. I'm white. You're not. But it gets messy, and that's what makes this a doctoral level seminar. The old seem to be the part of the good guys. And if you're a veteran, wow, you really skate through. But for the most part, we don't treat older people particularly well. They're invisible, which breaks my dualism. Or, worse, They're greedy geezers. I'm a greedy geezer, and proud of it. And yet I look at healthcare reform, and I wonder what this nation's doing. And I'm told I have 1 minute, so I'm going to start really shutting up. So how do we measure this? Well, it varies from place to place. Massachusetts, which used to be known as a liberal state, was always one of the more progressive states in terms of poverty. New York City, New York, great places to get poor. Southern states, in part because of the African American population, and in part because of the Civil War. We beat them. They're going to pay. Causes problems. When's the first national standard? 1960. It's a great story. I can't tell it. But we still have the same poverty standard we had in 1964. I'm done. So where do we go? I think that the Gulen Institute's commitment to social justice requires us to look at poverty as something that has to be addressed as a chief priority. And second, the means for doing this are to link welfare to education, as Mr. Kleinberg suggested, and welfare to health. Those who are going to be fat at lunch or take a smoke break before.
Because we started a little late, we're going to take questions at the end. If we could now welcome Julie Coan.
Should I go up there or stay here?
Whatever you're comfortable with.
Okay, I'll stay here. I'd like to thank the Gulen Institute for inviting me to speak here today. I did let them know that I'm not an expert on poverty or social justice, and I don't play one on TV either. But I can talk a little bit about public broadcasting and what we try and do to address some of those issues. And I want to talk a little bit about my story. Back in 2002, we had some layoffs at the station. At the time, we had been doing a show called Weekday, which is sort of like a Today Show format, kind of fun, cooking and sort of lighter stuff. And I thought, I was asked to lead up the local production unit, and I thought, well, let's take a step back and look at what we're doing and how we can serve the community to the best of our ability with the resources that we have. And this was 2002 was, a lot was going on in the world at that time. So we got the staff together and talked about what do we want our local production unit to look like? What do we want to do? And what we felt there was a need for in our community was a dialogue space. That in the news media, you hear a lot about things that are going on in the world, but there's no context for anything. There are these random events that happen, but there's no understanding of, well, why did that person do that? What's the history there? And as public television, we don't have a lot of resources. We are funded by the community. Over 85% of our operating budget comes from the community, with the vast majority of that coming from individual contributions. So we try and do the best we can with the resources that we have. So what we did is we established a show called The Connection, which was just a roundtable discussion. It wasn't anything elaborate. There weren't huge graphics and music and wow. Basically what it was every week we would get people together from our community who had different perspectives on whatever the topic was, and we would sit and we would talk in a respectful way. And before the show, I would always say to the guest, we don't care about ratings of public television. That's not why we exist. We exist to serve the community. And what we want from this half hour is a thoughtful, respectful discussion about the topic. With that said, we didn't want it to be, oh yes, but we want it to be an honest discussion without the yelling and the screaming, just people talking and sharing their thoughts and their feelings and their perspectives on how they see the world. And we talked about pretty much every topic that you could imagine, anything that was a hot button issue that was going on at the time. This is right the lead up to the Iraq War and what our role was in the world. And it was really remarkable to see the response from the community. People would come in, I would walk in, but prior to the show, I'd walk into the green room and the guests had been sitting there. And, the topics that we talked about were really hot button. And we had people that didn't really ever get a chance to talk to each other, and they were sitting in this room, and sometimes I'd walk into that green room, and you could feel the tension. They did not like to be with each other, sitting in this room, because they were, enemies. But after the show, it was remarkable the transformation that would happen in that half hour. People, were asked to listen to other people and to share their point of view. And when that half hour was over, people would say, wow, I see you in a completely different light than I had prior. And it was really amazing, that amount of healing that happened during that show. And we continue to do that. The Connection's no longer around, but we do another show called Houston 8, which is sort of the same idea as we get people together to talk about things from a different perspective. And I think in terms of the role of media in addressing the issues of poverty and social justice is we need to first we need to give voice to the poor. You never see poor people on TV. I mean, let's be honest. The last time we saw poor people and what their experience was really Katrina. I mean, you never, ever hear their stories. And so what we try and do through our show is give voice to those folks and give them an opportunity to say, hey, this is what's going on in my community, and this is what you can help with. And what's amazing, I don't know if it's just because it's a public television audience or it's just Houston or people in general, but people do want to help and make a difference, but they need to have good information. They need to know what's going on in their community and how they can help. And that's what we see our role as public television. I mean, commercial media, it's a little different. That's not their role. Commercial media, they exist solely to make a profit. That's why they exist. And people say, oh, the media this, the media that. What do you expect? That's what their job is. Their job isn't to inform, it isn't to educate, it isn't to enlighten, it is to make money for the corporations that own them. Simple as that. I think as a community, what we need to do is we need to start reevaluating and looking at our media landscape and asking, is it serving us to the best of our ability? Because really when you look at, we own the airwaves. The American people own the airwaves. Are we happy with what we're seeing? What can we do to affect what we're seeing? So I think we need to look at that. And also, I just think the state of the media in general right now is, I think we all, as a people, need to be concerned about what's happening with newspapers in general. They are on the decline. I don't know if people read the Chronicle or if anyone's here from the Chronicle. I apologize, but wow, it's really a sad, sad state of affairs. I love to read the newspaper. It's one of the joys of my life. And if I see a story about a fashion spread one more time in the Houston Chronicle, I'm going to scream, because that's not why the newspaper exists. The newspaper, well, let me back up a little. Television can communicate emotions to people. We don't always have an opportunity to really get in depth. I mean, we do on public television, but the media in general, we don't. Newspapers are the medium of record. That's where you can really get into the depth of why things happen and what's going on in the world. If newspapers go away, I am very concerned about what will happen to our democracy. And I think that's a discussion that we need as a community to be having. What can we do to help newspapers exist? Do we need to change the funding model? Because that's really what the issue is. Craigslist really took away a lot of the revenue that newspapers had. That's how they existed, by selling those ads and those classifieds. It's vaporized. Well, do we need to come up with sort of like a PBS nonprofit style funding model for newspapers? I mean, those are discussions that we really need to have, because I'm concerned about what the world will look like when newspapers go away and we don't have that source of information. Because, I don't know about everybody here, but bloggers make me a little nervous, because I don't know where their perspective is coming from. I know where their perspective is coming from. I don't know what their motivations are. Whereas I feel like if there's, and it might just be old-fashioned thinking, but I feel like if there's an entity like a newspaper, a building, there's more credibility, or there's more credibility, I shouldn't say that there's some sense of accountability, whereas bloggers, I feel like they're just out there, and that's not in general. There are a lot of bloggers that do a lot of good work, but I guess I'm just a little uncomfortable with that model right So that's really all I have to say about the role of leader. I mean, I can go on and on about it, but I'd really just like to hear your questions at the end.
You have about 7 more minutes if you'd like to add anything.